Hey, it's Kate from Marvelous Videos. Today we look at horrific sea creatures from the Rift explained. Our pick for today's video is this 1990s sci-fi horror thriller film called The Rift. It's also known as The Endless Descent. Directed by Spanish director Juan Piquer Simon, the story revolves around a submarine rescue mission, which gets wrecked because of mutated creatures cultivated by the company that sent the submarine itself. The fact that these creatures were created mainly as bioweapons only adds to the gravity of the situation. The 1990s saw a rise in the number of underwater-themed movies, with films such as Leviathan, The Abyss, The Evil Below, DeepStar Six, and Lords of the Deep taking over. The Rift, despite being created on a low budget, managed to pull off a pretty decent portrayal of several underwater creatures. It's often compared to other underwater creature movies, such as 1989's Leviathan and 1979's Alien. This is a bit unfair because the other two movies were significantly more high-end, as they had a much higher budget. Ali Ermey is joined by other members of the cast, such as Jack Scalia, who sports a perfect hairstyle throughout the movie, Deborah Adair, who rivals Scalia in pulling off a poofed-up mullet, Ray Wise, Emilio Linda, John Tolles, and Eli Puget. The movie was filmed in the outskirts of Madrid and never actually hit the theatres, yet it still managed to be a compelling and highly entertaining horror movie. Despite the low budget, the special effects are more than good enough for a movie filmed in 1990. Composer Joel Goldsmith composed the score for the movie, and he played it safe with the string synths that are almost used in every 90s horror. If you want to know more about the movie itself, as well as the many monstrous creatures, stay tuned. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe to Marvelous Videos. Press the bell icon to get a notification every time we post a video, so that you can stay up to date with the latest and enjoy more juicy details and terrifying villains and creatures on the regular.
It's huge!
This is what happens when several genetic mutation experiments go wrong at once. The movie opens with a shirtless Wick Hayes, played by Jack Scalia, being woken up from his sleep. His ideal 90s poofy hairstyle has not been affected despite being asleep for hours. He is called to Washington DC because an experimental submarine called the Siren 1 that he had designed had gone awry. Wick is made to join a rescue team alongside an experienced NATO crew, with the objective of rescuing the Siren 1. And what better name to give the rescue sub than Siren 2? Maybe this was a bad omen. You wouldn't name a cruise ship Titanic 2, even though hitting an iceberg in today's day is probably unlikely due to global warming and all. The crew in the sub consists of salami, teriyaki sauce, olives, mayonnaise, and bacon. No, we're just kidding. It's unfortunately just a bunch of humans. One of them being the token stereotypical black character because diversity didn't really exist in the 90s. The crew hated Wick because they were all told that Siren 1 went down because he had installed a self-destruct button into it. Captain Phillips, played by Ali Ermey, isn't the most warm and welcoming guy either, especially when it comes to Wick. Rather, he's like the overly strict, discipline-obsessed teachers who really got on your nerves throughout school. Nick's ex-wife Nina, played by Deborah Adair, is a lieutenant who is also part of the team, and now they must cooperate on the ship, much to Nina's distaste. As the sub moves through the ice, it pulls the Titanic by taking damage, because global warming wasn't as rampant in the 90s as it is now. The world only got hotter after Christina Aguilera released her song Dirty in the 2000s. Wick is mad at the military for altering his sub design, as it almost landed them dead. He gets into a fight with the captain and is banned from entering the control room. The captain thinks that the other scientist, Robbins, played by Ray Wise, can handle everything better. In the control room, they detect a signal. They suspect it's the black box's signal from the Siren 1 and is coming from a rift deep in the ocean. Much to their surprise, there are plants growing in that area which should technically not be possible, as photosynthesis is biologically impossible in that depth. But since the phenomenon has happened and the plot needs to move forward, Nina needs to get her hands on the seaweed sample. The captain sends a guy called Sven into the ocean to A, get the sample, and B, report on the wreckage from Siren 1, because the ship is convinced that the radar is acting up due to the sub being nearby. Sven sends the seaweed sample up and swims downwards to investigate the wreckage. There, he comes across a corpse of one of the crew members from Siren 1. He freaks out and is soon attacked by tentacles sprouting out of something. The waters get bloody as he dies in the hands, legs, whatever, of the creature. His friend blames himself for not rescuing him, but people console him by saying that there was nothing he could have done. The captain orders for the mission to continue, despite the death, because he hasn't had his character development arc yet. The sub is then attacked by a creature that looks like a gigantic iceberg lettuce that's white and fleshy. They manage to ward it off by reversing the polarity, because this trick always works, and are then hit with another problem. The sub is sinking into the abyss. So, obviously, the main character has to save the day now. He succeeds, but the captain is a bitter hater and lectures him for not following orders. Nina's research shows that the seaweed absorbs high amounts of oxygen and discharges toxins. Meanwhile, the black box signal is still present. The sub enters the area and the signal starts acting up, just like the captain does every time Wick breathes against his wishes. The crew suits up and gets equipped with guns that look like the kind of stuff you get at laser tag. There, they take a boat to the rift. They enter a cave-like place where one of the guys gets attacked by a creature that looks like an oversized fly and female genitalia with 2 brains simultaneously. But it was not the only one of its kind there. Soon the others begin to pop up and the crew engages in a more realistic laser tag shootout. They also end up shooting the guy in the end to end his suffering. There are other weird monsters as well, and after tackling them, the crew bumps into the crew of the Siren 1, where everyone looks like they've been roasted. They get their hands on a floppy disk in the sub. Meanwhile, in the Siren 2, the seaweed sample has encompassed the entire lab, turning it mouldy and disgusting. Muller goes to touch it and it attacks him. The thing takes over his entire body, making him look like a fungus, and he dies. The weed overgrew only because it had found its way into the water supply of the submarine. After another monster attack, they get back to Siren 2 and watch the contents of the floppy disk. Turns out the company they were working for, that is Contec, were creating bioweapons and wanted to accelerate its evolution. For that, they had conducted genetic engineering experiments illegally, but they failed spectacularly and instead gave rise to all the weird, slimy, monstrous mutant creatures. They go back to the cave to rescue their fellow member Anna and engage in some more laser tag.
I'm gonna send you flare!
She is killed by weed tentacles. The crew finds eggs with alien-like creatures in them and fight a monster that looks like a carnal flower, while the audience is hit with a plot twist. Turns out, Robbins is a double agent for Contec. He decides to lock the others and flee in an escape pod. Unfortunately for him, Wick had designed the ship and uses a worthless microchip to make him believe that Robbins couldn't do anything without it. The captain and Robbins fight and he kills Robbins by brushing his face against the seaweed infestation on Muller's body. In the end, the redemption arc for the captain comes to a full circle, as he aids Wick and Nina escape and stays back to die as the submarine self-destructs, because the weed was taking over him. As the movie closes, Wick and Nina indulge in some romance, because what better way to resolve a monster attack? The Rift is a pretty solid underwater monster movie, but all B-horror flicks face scrutiny from the critics. It didn't make that big of a rift in the box office either. Also, Ali Ermi isn't particularly fond of the movie himself, but at the end of the day, it's all subjective. The movie was quite entertaining, and the best thing about it is the pacing, as the movie builds up the tension from the very start instead of beating around the bush. Another cool addition to it would be using many creatures instead of one. A sole big, monstrous creature lurking in the depths of the sea, attacking ships and submarines has been done plenty of times, so watching a movie with many horrifying creatures was quite the change of air. And let's not forget the interesting designs that some of them have. One of the best things about the movie was the visual aesthetic used in the scenes with the control room. The lighting in particular was impeccable, especially for a B-grade movie. It had the 90s steampunk anime vibe going on with the blue lighting and the technology. Using neon green in the gadgets and contrasting it with the blue lighting worked like a charm. It also has the arcade gaming vibe to it. You really have to watch it to know. Horrific sea creatures explored. The Rift, aka Endless Descent, has some pretty horrific creatures. Some would even say they look hilarious. First, let's get down to how these creatures came into being. While the crew from Siren 2 were down in the underwater cave, they came across the Siren 1. Everyone was found dead and there was an intriguing floppy disk. After running that disk in the Siren 2, they learned that the existence of the creatures and the submarine getting wrecked were not coincidences, and rather a part of something bigger. The government was using the submarine for a biological experiment with DNA, because they wanted to create bioweapons. They had also built a DNA accelerator which was supposed to speed up the creature's evolution, but things went south and the mutants attacked everyone. Government involvement in villainous actions happens to be quite the popular plot point. Think James Gunn's Suicide Squad. Now that you know where the creatures originated from, it's time to take a dive into all those mutations who are cool enough to give the crew a hard time, but not cool enough to be used in Ben 10's Omnitrix. The first creature we see is when Sven goes over 22,000 feet deep into the sea, which shouldn't statistically be possible. Even if he wasn't killed, he would realistically die while ascending by sustaining a brain injury. On seeing the corpse of the Siren 1 crew member, he takes its pictures. Maybe the nearby giant octopi didn't like it because not everyone is fond of the camera and the press. Its tentacles sprout out and kill Sven, but we don't get to see much of the creature after that. The next creature that appears right after is the thing that looks like a weird white glob, mimicking the appearance of the lettuce you get in burgers, but thicker and bigger. It latches onto the submarine and pulls it down into the rift. Attacks help bring out the heroism in Wick, who handles the situation by reversing the polarity, because being a Doctor Who fanboy is the ideal lifestyle. The third creature we see is a sample of the seaweed itself, even though it's not really a creature, but just a scary plant. Move over, Pitcher Plant and Venus Flytrap. A new dangerous plant is in the house now. As Nina works in her lab, a fish jumps out of the water. The weed was placed with the fishes because who would have thought this creature would be dangerous? She spots that the thing had latched itself onto the fish and acted like an infestation. Later, she shows the captain the weed. It has grown alarmingly fast and has now infested the entire aquarium. Nina theorizes that the seaweed absorbs a lot of oxygen and gives out concentrated toxins. And the toxins weren't just regular toxins. It was too strong, especially for its size. It was a result of several complex mutations, and if it was allowed to grow on the surface, there would be an ecological disaster. The thing needed water to grow, so it couldn't go out of bounds while being confined to an aquarium, but it wasn't stupid either. It managed to find its way into the aqueduct system of the ship and grew tremendously. As Muller enters a room, he finds himself surrounded by the weed, which looks mouldy and disgusting, like fungus on steroids. He touches it, trying to figure out what's going on, and it latches itself onto him. The weed gradually begins to take over his body, turning him into a fungus party house. When Nina finds him, Muller is practically covered in the weed while the thing probes into his brain region. A couple of scenes later, Anna encounters the weed near the DNA accelerator in Siren 1 and drags her in. During the climax, the weed helps round out the captain's redemption arc in the eyes of Wick. As they try to escape the submarine in an escape pod, Captain Phillips lets Wick and Nina pass and stays back himself to die as the sub self-destructs. When Wick is taken back by this decision, the captain raises his palm and shows him that he had fallen victim to the weed as well. The next creature is the stuff that attacked one of the crew members in the cave. The one that looked like female genitalia with 2 brains and also like an oversized fly at the same time. Many others that look the same pop up and the crew plays live action arcade shooting with them, shooting its head because suddenly a bunch of scientists have impeccable aim. Plus the creatures burst out after being shot like you'd see in video games. 2 other creatures join the party. One looks like a snake and grunts like a low-budget CGI dinosaur, while the other looks like an oversized seahorse with a taste for flesh. On the way back to Siren 1, the doctor of the ship falls into the water. Suddenly, a creature swims up to him immediately and kills him. It's hard to say what the creature was, but it did look like an eel to some extent. As it was able to kill the doctor so easily, it can be assumed that it had sharp fangs as well. As the crew enters a giant cavern, they come across what looks like really big eggs. Well, it was less of an egg and more of a uterus with a fetus in it. The fetus looked very similar to aliens, with its wide head, big slanted eyes, and a super narrow chin. It also cried like a kid, except its cry was more like an angry cat mixed with crow.
Don't shoot it.
What is that? My God.
Lastly, they come across the boss level creature of the movie. This is the stuff that comes up in video games after you've completed all levels and have finally reached the boss level. The thing is stuck to the walls of the cave and has 15 limbs. The middle is circular and the limbs branch out from there. It has a head which looks mostly like its limbs, but the tip has the face of the creature. It attacks Skeets and eats him up. The others try to shoot it, but unlike the other creatures, this one does not go down from mere gunshots. Video game inspiration is heavy in this movie, and that is made more apparent when the creature is finally taken down by shooting into barrels. This is a common tactic in gaming, where the character shoots a barrel and there's an explosion. This triggers a chain reaction of explosions, destroying the accelerator and the facility itself, finally killing the creature. As the scene ends, Robbins is seen smiling at his screen, claiming mission accomplished. Turns out, he's a government agent after all. After the mutations from the experiment went out of control, they sent Robbins with the Siren 2 crew to make sure the mutations were eliminated. And he does so at the cost of the lives of several others. So he's the bad guy after all, not the creatures. The creatures had no particular objectives. They were advanced and lethal evolutions of regular sea creatures. For example, a normal octopus wouldn't need to attack and eat humans, but these ones do. The same goes for the monstrous eel that killed the Doctor. It's hard to say whether the oversized fly and the boss level creature were evolved forms of other normal aquatic animals, or whether they were a completely new life form, because the designs were unlike anything we've ever seen before. Contact originally wanted to probably use these creatures in war, while keeping it under control and confined to themselves. The seaweed in particular would be adept at taking out entire opponent fleets and would be an asset for the Navy. The other creatures would also be able to take down opponents easily, but still they are pretty easy to kill. All you need is one shot. Maybe that is because things went haywire before the mutations could mutate properly, to be strong enough to sustain damage from weapons. Is the Rift a B version of 1989's Leviathan? Science fiction horror had been gaining tremendous momentum throughout the 80s. Sometime in the late 80s though, especially around 1989, a particular subgenre of sci-fi horror saw itself being catapulted into the mainstream: undersea sci-fi horror. Around 5 films of this sort came out during this time, namely Leviathan, The Abyss, DeepStar Six, Lords of the Deep, and of course, The Rift. Leviathan and The Rift may be perceived as different movies. Being under the same genre does not mean that the two movies will follow the same path. However, they do have some parallels between them. It's not a very on-your-face parallel, but quite easy to spot nonetheless. Probably because The Rift was heavily inspired by Leviathan, which is the most critically acclaimed and the most popular undersea sci-fi horror. In Leviathan, the cast goes for an expedition under the sea where they come across an abandoned, sunken Russian ship called the Leviathan. They unleash a disease that turns people into amphibious monsters. In The Rift, the Siren 2 also goes for an undersea expedition to retrieve the Siren 1, where the seaweed infests people and kills them after turning them into mold. They do sound similar, but there are some key differences. The most notable one being that the crew in The Rift did not turn into monsters and instead just died. Leviathan follows a similar pattern when compared to other creature-oriented films, where the monster appears midway into the movie. Till before that, the audience is introduced to the cast and lots of technology. The dialogues deal with big, technological words which might not make any sense to the people actually working in that field. Marine scientists probably do not deal with underwater problems by reversing the polarity. The monster in Leviathan finds its way into the deep-sea mining platform. The disease is stored in a bottle of vodka, and drinking it causes the crew members to mutate into fishy, gelatinous creatures. The Rift has a scene where the seaweed creatively finds its way into the aqueducts and then grows out of control. But it has no correlations to diseases or transformations. It's simply a plant capable of causing ecological disaster. Maybe its high toxin content could cause diseases, but frankly the cast wouldn't last long enough with a weed nearby to see the day where they would begin to mutate from the disease. So even though there are uncanny resemblances between 1989's Leviathan and 1990's The Rift, the latter is not a B-movie version of the former. It can be said that Juan Piquer Simon was simply influenced by George Mikosmatos' impeccable sci-fi undersea horror and used a couple of elements here and there. But in the end, the two movies are different in terms of both monsters and objectives.
I think we've hit the mother lode.
Oh, man. This place is bigger than the Astrodome.
Why should you watch The Rift? The Rift is not particularly known for its box office collection. and for many viewers that can be a determining factor as to whether they want to watch a particular movie or not. But you need to remember that the Rift came out during a time when the undersea sci-fi horror market was getting saturated, as several movies of the same sort were popping up left and right. On top of that, the other movies in this department, such as James Cameron's Alien and The Abyss or Cosmatos' Leviathan, are all high-budget sci-fi movies. On the contrary, the Rift was produced on a limited budget and still manages to hold its own against these monster budget films, pun intended, which is only testament to the entertainment factor of the movie. When it comes to B-movies, the Rift has the throne. One particular weak point in the Rift is a very obvious one: the performance of the cast. The dialogue delivery or emotional expression does not feel convincing at all. Luckily, all is not lost when you have Ali Ermey playing a key role. He holds his own with his portrayal of the captain against the rest of the cast, and gives a performance compelling enough to make you ignore the others. A strength that the Rift seems to play on is its aesthetics, visuals, and gore. As the heads of the creatures are shot, they burst into blood and organs, so the gore is good enough to keep ardent fans of horror satisfied. The seaweed infestation of the human body is so gross that it's actually good and looks extremely convincing as well. Despite being a low-budget film shot over 30 years ago, Muller never looks like a bad case of CGI while his entire body has been taken over. In the scene where the captain shows Wick and Nina that the seaweed has latched onto him, it looks gross because it's so convincing. The Rift also tries to utilise bits and pieces of humour here and there, but it misses more often than it hits. That's not really a problem though, because it's a very minor part of the movie. Ali Ermey's character Captain Phillips undergoes a great character development arc. In the beginning, he is one of those annoying, obsessed with protocol and societal talk kind of a guy, who rains hellfire on the main character Wick. He keeps blaming Wick for the demise of the Siren 1, and criticises him to no end. By the end of the movie, he warms up to Wick, realising that Wick was not at fault, and ultimately sacrifices himself to save Wick and Nina. The Rift is available on US VHS as Endless Descent. It was also released as a Region 1 Blu-ray in the year 2016. So what do you think of these creatures? Did you like this video? If yes, then don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Till then, stay safe and have a great day.
Nina, this time, they pay.